Rebonjour, chers frères et sœurs. Nous avons à lire China and the Three Worlds, a foreign policy reader. Edited by King C. Cheng and M.A. Sharp was the publishing house, Armonk, New York. In this book, we will read China's foreign relations between 1949 and 1970s. Then, China's foreign relations since 1971. Then we will have the theory and perception of the three worlds. Then we will read the documentary introduction on policy, Mao Zedong, 2. A powerful weapon to unite the people and defeat the enemy. The CCP-UP Provincial Committee also may be the example. Then we will read China and the Three Worlds, Deng Xiaoping. And then we have 4, Chairman Mao's theory of the differentiation of the three worlds is a major contribution to Marxism's Leninism, People's Daily. Then after that, we can understand the documentary introduction 1 and 2. 1 is the joint communique Richard M. Nixon and Zhou Enlai. 2. Why did our country accede to Nixon's request for a visit? Zhou Enlai. Then the Kunming document, Kunming military regent. 4. Necessary compromises, Zhou Enlai. That is the first. Then we will come to the energy, economic, and maritime issues, where we have documentary introduction. Behind the so-called energy crisis, Shang Shen. Then we have, secondly, Third World struggle against hegemony in the economic sphere, Peking Review. Then we have what motivates economic cooperation? Question. Su Kenshin has the word. And then we have maritime hegemonic features, fully exposed. Soviet social imperialism Chiang Shentun. Then we have 5. Another struggle against hegemonism. UN Conference on the Law of the Sea by Xinhua correspondent. Then we come to modernization and foreign relations. Here we have documentary introduction, speed up socialist economic construction. 2. The relationship between China and other countries. Mao Zedong. And then we have 3. Self-reliance and making foreign things serve China. That was Luo Yangshen. Then we have the speed up. We have speed up the modernization of national defense, People's Daily, AL or AI. We will read. I am really grateful to have such documentation that gave me the chance to master all the questions that I have to learn concerning international relations, economics development. This book was published in 1979 by M.E. Sharp, Inc., 80 Business Park Drive, Armond, New York. Post code 10,504. I'm just quoting by reading as it goes with my own studies. And I don't sell anything along my research to earn any money. So thanks for all of you who have given us such knowledge. A foreign policy reader can see that China and the 3 words, an invaluable collection, especially useful for instructors who want their students to read the PRC's own statements and interpretation concerning foreign relations. You have Donald W. Klein, Tufts University. Then we have emphasizing major current issues, China and the 3 words, is a collection of Chinese internal and public documents written or published by and large between 1972 and 1977. 37 documents are presented under the following headings. 1. Theory and perceptions of the 3 worlds. 2. Sino-American rapprochement. 3. International opposition to the superpowers' hegemonism. 4. Problems with socialist countries. 5. Energy, economic, and maritime issues. 6. Taiwan and normalization. 7. Modernization and foreign relations. A comprehensive introduction by the editor highlights the major developments since 1949 with an emphasis on the 1970s. It is King Si Shen, who is a professor of political science at Rutgers University. His publications include Vietnam and China, 1969, and The Foreign Policy of China, 1972. Thank you so much with such a wonderful work. So, in this book, problems with Indochina, Albania, and Yugoslavia, except from background on China, New York, December 26, 1977. This title is the editor's. The original title is Huang Hua's 42,000 word foreign policy address. Problems with Indochina, Albania, and Yugoslavia. Here it is said, the three Indochina states, there have been border conflicts between Vietnam and Cambodia, and between Laos and Cambodia recently. We are on July 3rd, 1977. Cambodia has issued an order for national mobilization, while Vietnam and Laos have also taken emergency measures to prepare for war. At the same time, Cambodia has clashed with Thailand. Why is it that the three Indochina states, instead of being united themselves, have clashed on their borders? This is due to historical factors and also to instigations by social imperialism. Historically speaking, there has been a considerable period of dispute between the Vietnamese and the Cambodians on certain territorial and sovereignty problems. The root of the trouble can be traced to the demarcation of borders when France occupied Indochina. When the three Indochinese states were making concerted efforts against U.S. imperialism, they did not have the time to consider this problem. Now that the war has ended, they have become seriously concerned about this problem again. As brethren on the same front, they could have emulated the example of China in solving her border problems with Burma and Afghanistan through mutual respect and mutual concessions. However, they failed to do so. It became impossible to end the disputes, and the only solution was war. This is entirely due to the sabotage and instigation of social imperialism. After Sihanouk was overthrown, Khieu Samphan led the Cambodian Liberation Army to join the anti-US National Salvation Struggle. At the same time, however, they were still very weak. Vietnam was the strongest in military strength, followed by the Pathet Lao forces. Vietnam then supported Cambodia with weapons and equipment she had obtained from the socialist countries, as well as those captured from the US forces. Meanwhile, like China, she also sent military instructors to train the Cambodian troops and a military advisor group to help direct operations. In several important campaigns in Cambodia, Vietnam sent its own crack troops to attack the Long Nol forces. Finally, in the Battle of Liberation for Phnom Penh, Vietnam sent more than 2 army divisions into the war. As a result, Phnom Penh was liberated even before Saigon. Finally, with Saigon's liberation, political power was transferred smoothly, and the armed struggle of 3 Indochina states ended in victory. However, this process also produced the following 2 problems. First, self-conceited Vietnam deemed that without its help, Cambodia could not have been liberated. Consequently, it assumed the airs of a big brother, demanding obeisance from Cambodia in everything. After the liberation, Cambodia had to ask repeatedly for Vietnam to withdraw its troops. Although Vietnam eventually acceded to the request, its troops remained deployed along the Cambodian-Vietnamese border, seriously threatening the security of Cambodia. Naturally, it was difficult for Cambodia to swallow this situation, and herein lies the contradiction. Secondly, when the War of National Liberation was being waged in Cambodia, the slogan then was, "Whoever opposes U.S. imperialism and its lackey, the Long Nol Sirik Matak puppet regimes, whether they were social or organization, group or army bands will all be regarded as brothers in solidarity. Consequently, the components of Cambodian Liberation Army were extremely complex. Some were the original royal troops who had come over. Some were the communist underground. Others were organized by patriotic elements, and still more were organized by the oppressed peasant. Some of these troops were trained by us, others by Vietnam, which was backed by Soviet revisionism. Thus, Soviet revisionism took advantage of this opportunity and infiltrated into certain unity of Cambodian forces. After the liberation of Cambodia, simultaneous with the revamping of state organs, the Cambodians also revamped their army. They resolutely disbanded those military organs and units that had been infiltrated by Soviet revisionism and arrested some impure elements, sending them to the military tribunal for trial, or ousting them permanently from the army, thereby purifying their ranks and strengthening their fighting strengths. What they did was strictly their domestic affair, and no one could criticize them for it. Still, it caused dissatisfaction on the part of Soviet revisionism, which used it as an excuse to sow dissension between Vietnam and Cambodia, thereby further aggravating the contradiction between the two countries, the two parties. We have discussed the problems that have arisen in these two countries since the end of Indochina War. There is another difference concerning anti-imperialism and anti-revisionism. It has been our conviction that in order to oppose imperialism, we must also oppose revisionism. And only by opposing revisionism can we gain thorough victory, Soruk victory, or Soruf victory in the anti-imperialist struggle. The Vietnamese view is that they oppose imperialism, but not revisionism. When Vo Nguyen Giap came to China, he even said that they have rooted U.S. imperialism without the need to oppose revisionism. What we told him was that, quote, there is a proverb in China, quote, don't chase away the wolves from the front door, only to admit tigers and leopards through the back door. Full stop. Within a certain period of time, it will not matter if they do not realize the situation. There is no need to argue with them. They will realize it. when they come to suffer later. Because the Cambodians had suffered from the Soviets before, they understood that in order to oppose imperialism, it is necessary to oppose revisionism at the same time. Didn't Sihanouk also cherish illusions about Soviet revisionism? What has happened to him? We must have patience in dealing with certain problems. There is a great ideological difference between Cambodia and Vietnam, one being anti-revisionist and the other not anti-revisionist. As a result of this situation, coupled with the two factors mentioned above and their historical origin, eventually the two sides came to fight against each other. Once the war started, troubles came naturally. Sometimes problems can be solved by a decisive battle in which one combatant proved to be definitely superior to the other. Although losses may be greater, the problems can be settled in a thorough manner. However, where the imbroglio between Vietnam and Cambodia is concerned, no one knows how long this will drag on. Soviet revisionist social imperialist has repeatedly invited Vietnam to send many delegations to Soviet Union, continuously sowing the seed for war, instigating these two close neighboring fraternal states to be at each other's throat, with the attempt of eventually intruding into Cambodia, making it into an advanced base for Soviet expansion in Southeast Asia. On the issue between Vietnam and Cambodia, we have made clear our 4-point stand to the three Indochina states. 1. The three states Indochina should stop all armed conflicts and return to the negotiating table. They should, in accordance with the spirit of Summit Conference of three Indochina states, based on the common goal of building a prosperous, peaceful, and democratic post-war Indochina, seek to resolve their differences through mutual respect and mutual concession. 2. All people of the three Indochina states cherish the same wish for solidarity. Having been neighbors for generations, they have no basic conflicts of interest, and they should be united at one. If the three states deem it necessary, China is willing to serve as mediator in order to enable the three states to return to the negotiating table to resolve their problems and promote their solidarity, friendship, and cooperation. China also hopes that the three states will continue to make their contributions in supporting other Southeast Asian countries in their movement of national liberation, people's revolution, and armed struggle. 3. Although China has been and is willing to do whatever she can in giving unselfish aid and in assuming her internationalist duty to these three states in their anti-US national salvation struggle and in their post-war task of building democracy and socialism, China will not take the side of any state to aggrave tension among the three states, nor will she provide any side with military aid that will aggrave tension or give any other kind of aid. 4. We support the stand of Cambodia and her people against Soviet revisionist social imperialism and will not watch indifferently any intervention in Cambodian sovereignty or coveting of Cambodian territory by social imperialism. We will support Cambodia and her people in their struggle and in their actions to protect Cambodia's territorial integrity and national sovereignty by giving all possible assistance. There is another important issue which should be mentioned here. That is the question of ownership of the South Sea Islands. The territory of China reaches as far southward as the James Shoals, near Borneo of Malaysia. These South Sea Islands include Tumasha, the Pratas, Sisha, the Paracel, the Paracels, and the Nangsha, the Spratless Islands. On the Sisha Islands, there is a procurement station of our Foreign Trade Organization. I don't know whether they have representative attending our meeting here today. Not today. We are talking about the date of July 30th, 1977. So, I don't know whether they have representatives attending our meeting here today. The Ministry of Foreign Trade recently held a conference to exchange experience in learning from Tachin and Tashai, and it may have representatives attending the specialized conference of army forces. To go back to these islands, most of them formed by coral reefs, are rich in marine products and also in guano, which is a natural fertilizer. There are also considerable untapped underground resources. We have our troops, fishermen, and administrative organs on the Sisha and the Chungsha Islands. We have been Chinese, which have been Chinese territory from the time immemorial. I remember that while I was still a school boy, I read about the islands in the geography books. At the time, I never heard anyone say that those islands were not Chinese. With the Fourth Middle Eastern War, a petroleum war was unleashed by OPEC, and the capitalist world had to face its energy crisis. Since then, there have been disputes over the question of ownership of the Sisha and Nangsha Islands. The navy of the Nguyen Van Thieu regime even thought with us at Sisha, ending in disastrous defeat from them. The Chiang Kai-shek clique now occupies some of the Nangsha Islands. Since Chiang Kai-shek is no more, let us say that Chiang Shing-kuo's troops are occupying some islands there. The Philippines also occupies some islands, and so does Vietnam. The Sisha Islands are presently under our control. The Vietnamese claim that the islands belong to them. Let them talk that way. They have repeatedly asked us to negotiate with them on the Sisha issue. We have always declined to do so. Several Vietnamese delegations that came to China recently also brought up this matter. When Pham Van Dong was here around April 20th, he again asked us to discuss the matter, and we declined as before. If Vietnam should disregard the historical fact and invade Sisha, the central government has already instructed our garrison troops there that any invasion of Sisha by the troops of any country or any harassment of the islands will be a challenge to China's sovereignty and will be resolutely deal with and any invaders through thoroughly and completely annihilated. The main question now is Nangsha, on which we will not take any measure for the time being, although its sovereignty unquestionably belongs to China. Any exploration of resources on Nangsha Island and their peripheral waters must have China's consent if it is to be valid. You may explore them if you wish, but when the time comes, we will confiscate them completely. As to the ownership of those islands, there are historical records that can be verified. There is no need for negotiation since they originally belonged to China. In this respect, Taiwan's attitude is all right. At least they have some patriotism and will not sell out the islands. As to when we will recover the islands, this will have to wait until the time is ripe. Now we are talking about the second, the Albania questions. Let us read. Recently, Zeri 1 Populate, organ of the Albanian Party of Labour, published an article attacking our policy of actively relying the third world nations. The Albanian embassy in China distributed copies of that article to all other foreign embassies, further publicizing the differences between the Chinese and Albanian states and between the parties. The People's Daily did not carry that article, but the reference news accepted and published it. At inappropriate time, we will reproduce articles of other foreign newspapers, either in the People's Daily or Kwangming Daily, in order to clarify certain issues unofficially. In the basis of instructions, Chairman Hua and Vice Premier Teng, we will not publish any article openly to refute the Albanian Labour Party's erroneous views. Instead, we will be some other means publish Chairman Mao's correct line, and though concerning the establishment of an international united front against imperialism and social imperialism. On the one hand, this will prevent the further escalation and publicizing of the difference between the two parties. On the one hand, this restraint is also for the sake of maintaining the friendly relations between the two parties and the two people of China and Albania, as well as preventing chaos and confusion in the thought and line of international communist movement. People have asked, I quote, why did Albania turn around and is now opposing us? In this summer of 1966, under the personal leadership of Chairman Mao, our country launched the unprecedented Grey Proletarian Cultural Revolution. The purpose of revolution was to prevent the restoration of capitalism within the party, which could change our nation into revisionism. In the meantime, ever since the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Albania has stood more and more resolutely with us in opposing revisionism from the standpoint of Marxism, Leninism. Later on, Albania emulated China's experience in launching the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Albania launched a series of campaigns to oppose and prevent revisionism internally, such as opposition to bureaucracy, having cadres participate in physical labor, abolition of military ranks, launching of education reform, and launching of a cultural revolution. The purpose of these measures was also to prevent capitalist restoration. The 18th awareness and the revolutionary alertness of the broad masses, and to prevent subversion and aggression from without. However, while adopting this series of measures, Albania has neglected theoretical construction in Marxism-Lenin. In dealing with the ideological differences existing within the party, the Albanians failed to use the method of actively waging ideological struggle to solve the problem. That would, on the one hand, have clearly defined the problem, and on the other hand, united the comrades, so that a new solidarity would have been achieved under the principle of Marxism-Leninism. On the contrary, they either evaded struggle but negative improvisation, or expanded some of the non-antagonistic contradictions onto antagonistic contradictions. Okay. This has caused discrimination and attack against some of the excellent members of Party of Labour and brought losses to the party itself. For instance, we have recently distributed to certain units Enver Hoxha's speech at the Central Politburo of the Albanian Party of Labour, and also some materials on the Albania problem. It will be seen that in dealing with the problems of Bekir Balaku and Abdil Kelizi, and what the Albanians have done is to emphasize contradictions, thereby enlarging ideological differences into a question of friendship. No, in question of friend and foe. We have also studied carefully the data about Petrit Dume and Zafer Spayu, and also about Zashi Leshi. Explanation is given to us in the note. I quote, Baluku was Minister of People's Defense, Kelizi, President of the Albanian Chinese Friendship Society, and Doom, Chief of General Staff. All three have been purged. Spayu is Vice Chairman of the Council of Ministers, and Leshi is President of the Presidium of the People's Assembly of Albania. Let us continue our reading. Gerard, to these problems, we have adopted the following principles. 1. We respect the sovereignty of the Albanian Party of Labour and will not interfere in its internal affairs. 2. From the standpoint of the international communist enterprise, we have the right to submit to them some of our views and opinions, which are different from theirs, with the purpose of upholding the interests of entire international communist enterprise and the fraternal friendship between the Chinese and Albanian parties. We have offered our opinions. Whether they will accept them or not, it is a different matter. For example, if we consider Hashi Lieshi's speech detrimental to Sino-Albanian friendship, we will state our views whether they accept them or not. Another quotation. Albania's present difference with us centers primarily on whether or not we need to unite with the third world and whether it's not the world should or not the world should be divided into three parts. Should we place our main attention in the third world and regard the third world as the principal revolutionary force against imperialism and social imperialism? Question. What is most important is that we tackle first the question of whether the world should be divided into three parts, and then discuss whether it is necessary to focus our attention on the third world. A true Marxist must not only understand the ultimate goal of his own struggle, but also be able to evolve in a timely way to correct policy and tactic that should be adopted toward the ultimate goal. Thus, this is a question of selecting the means to adopt what policy and tactic at what time must be geared to the need of a certain stage of revolution. Hence, a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist must also recognize that revolution not only should be continuous, but also must be divided into stages. A continuous revolutionary who nevertheless does not correctly recognize that revolution has its stages is bound to make ultimately slogans and action programs, thereby causing the whole proletarian revolutionary enterprise to be bogged down or fall into the abyss of defeat. Wang Ming and Li Lisan were totally ignorant of the particular character, task, and objects of the various stages of the Chinese Revolution. Hence, they were not qualified to lead and were incapable of leading the Chinese Revolution. Well, revolution has its stage. There is also a link between one stage and the next, instead of each stage being isolated by itself. The preceding stage serves as the basis for the following stage, while the latter is the continuation of the former. After completion of the preceding stage of revolution, its foundation must be guided to the following stage, which, comparatively speaking, is superior. However, without a lower stage, there will not develop a higher stage. Merely to stress continuous revolution without understanding that the revolution without understanding that revolution has its various stages, will lead only to revolutionary blindness or leftist adventurism. However, without the spirit of believing in continuous revolution and remembering only that there are stages in any revolution, will make it impossible to guide the revolution to advance in the timely way from a lower stages to a higher stages. Consequently, the revolution will lose a precious opportunity, retreat, and suffer a setback. Once a revolution stagnates, it will inevitably turn to the right. We call the Gang of Four extreme rightists because they not only failed to push our revolution ahead, but also pulled it back, therefore causing us to lose more than 10 years of our time. The struggle in the world today is not centered on how to advance to the stage in which the just a minute, please. I don't stop. I have to finish the reading. I'm opening the door to the lady. Sorry. Let us continue. Sorry. So, we were. The struggle in the world today, I have to very beginning. The struggle in the world today is not centered on how to advance to the stage in which the proletariat of the various countries will seize political power through political parties. Instead, this should be the stage in which the people and the government of the various countries in the world unite to eliminate the remnants of colonialism, to demand genuine national independence and sovereignty, to prevent political interference from without, and to seek economic independence, thereby bringing the struggle against hegemony of the two superpowers, especially the struggle against Soviet revisionist social imperialism, to a high tide. The extension of territorial waters to 200 miles is a struggle waged by third world nations to protect their marine resources. The Indian Ocean countries have suggested that the two superpowers stay away from their ocean, and that a non-nuclear region be established there. The 5 Asian nations have proposed the idea of establishing a peaceful and neutral zone guaranteed by the big powers in Southeast Asia. The aspirations of OPEC members, whether in relation to the hiking of petroleum prices or to hiking of petroleum prices, or to the demands for peace in the Middle East, are all struggles that evolve around the premise of anti-hegemonism. Anti-hegemony is the mainstream in the global struggle, the demand of times and the aspiration of the great majority of people everywhere. If we Marxist, Leninist, again, if we Marxist, Leninists do not proceed from the revolutionary aspirations of the majority of nations and peoples in the world, how then can we deserve the name of Marxist-Leninism? There are certain leading comrades of the Albanian Party of Labour who, like other fervent opportunists, are frantically advocating the advent of a revolutionary high tide, but fail to see what is the tide of the time. They want to lead blindly and adventurously the present stage of revolution to the realm of socialist revolution. They want to lead to lead the proletarian revolutionary rank and file, a powerful force now in the formative stage, to an adventurous offensive which will only cause the revolution to suffer another setback and retreat. They oppose the theory of third world, which is tantamount to opposing the struggle of the proletariat to rally and unite the majority of the masses. To ask the proletariat to seize political power alone and single-handedly is to court defeat. What happened to the left? What happened to the leftist adventures and urban rios launched by Chu Xiupai, Li Lizang, and Wang Ming? Question. We don't have to mention these historical evidences. However, history must not repeat itself. Consequently, we must clearly and firmly establish the theory of the third world and do a good job in relation to the third world. In presenting the issue this way, does it mean that we will not support a proletarian party in its armed struggle to overthrow the ruling class? No, absolutely no, not. It is regrettable that the Albanian party has this time fallen into the trap of opportunism. 3 points. As is well known, the Albanian party has accused China of practicing capitulationism and betraying principles. 3 points. The problems we had with Albania, quote, in the past were not made public. However, we can only face them squarely if they have become public knowledge. I cannot go into more details today. We would like to cite an old Chinese proverb. I quote, it takes more than one cold day to accumulate 3 feet of ice. Full stop. The split between Albania and China at present is limited to ideological differences. So, although there are some problems in the relationship between the two parties and the two states, they are not serious. Full stop. Now we have the problem of Yugoslavia. Many comrades have raised these questions. First, is Yugoslavia a revisionist country? We have advocated that in order to oppose imperialism, we must also oppose revisionism. Then, why should we not oppose Yugoslavia? 2. If we denounce Yugoslavia in the past, if we denounced Yugoslavia in the past, but are now trying to bring her into the ranks of solidarity, does this mean that our condemnation in the past was wrong? Or does this mean we have changed our line? Would that mean that we ourselves are changing to the revisionists? First, we must confirm the fact that Yugoslavia is a revisionist country. The Central Committee of China Communist Party, led by our great leader, Chairman Mao, and such older generation proletarian revolutionaries as Premier Zhu, Comrade Kang Sheng, and Comrade Deng Xiaoping, in its letter replying to the letter of March 30, 1963, from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was the third commentary of the 9 open letters, entitled, quote, "Is Yugoslavia a socialist country?" has made detailed exposures and analysis on the basic characters of Yugoslav revisionism on the basis of Yugoslavia's state characteristics, ownership and means of production, domestic and foreign policies, Tito's attitude toward the 3 peacefuls. We have peacefuls. There is a quote referring to peaceful transition, peaceful competition, and peaceful coexistence. That is the note. So, Tito's attitude toward the 3 peaceful, his attitude toward the solidarity of the socialist bloc and towards national liberation movements, his attitude toward the basic principles of Marxism, Leninism, and the policies and systems are carried out in the rural villages and in the country as a whole. Today, we have not changed our point of view, nor have the ideological and factual basis which supported our point of view being changed. Yugoslavia was, of course, revisionist then, and it still is revisionist now. If we say that Tito is the head of the oldest revisionism, that is all right. 3 points. Comrades, guess who proposed that we invite Tito to visit China? Question. It was Chairman Mao who so instructed us when he was alive. He said, quote, "We should always welcome Tito to visit us. Tito has experience in opposing the Soviet Union, and we can learn from him." Full stop. We have only 2 fists with which we must cope with Soviet revisionism and its Eastern European lackeys. With the United States and Western countries, and with Young Chang's dynasty, you say we must always cope with Yugoslavia. Are there any more? We quote, audience mentioned Vietnam and Korea. Any more? Another question. What about Japan, India, Burma, and Thailand? Audience, yes. The whole world is our enemy and no friend anywhere. Nobody else is making revolution and only we are on the left. 3 points. Our main task at present is to unite all the oppressed people. Our main task at present is to unite all the oppressed people and enslaved nations in the world, to unite all the peace-loving and progressive countries and peoples in the world in order to form the broadest possible international united front and bring the revolutionary struggle against the two hegemonic powers, especially Soviet revisionist social imperialism, to its high tide. Any country which is opposed to the two hegemonic powers supports national independence, national liberation, and people's revolution, no matter what its social and political system may be, and no matter whether it has had friendly relations with us or not in the past, can stand together with us on the same united front. Although the League of Communists of Yugoslavia is fundamentally antagonistic toward our party, nonetheless, it is entirely feasible for the Yugoslav state and people to have friendly contacts with our state and people. Full stop. Now, what shall we do if Tito, when he visits China, should raise the question of the relationship between our two parties? There is nothing to be afraid of. We can frankly state our point of view. For the state of opposing our common enemy, we can, if views of both sides become closer, tactically speaking, try to accommodate the other side as a historic task of this particular stage. Point. To achieve a specific goal of solidarity under certain principles cannot be described as mixing loose and together. To achieve a specific goal of solidarity under certain principles cannot be described as mixing loose mood together. It is to achieve flexibility in tactics, to stress our common agreements while allowing minor differences to remain. Full stop. This is not bargaining in political transactions. This is merely the means to an end. President Tito has earned these credits in the following three areas. First, he has achieved people's liberation and national independence in the anti-fascist struggle. 2. He has opposed foreign intervention and followed the road of independence and sovereignty. 3. He has promoted solidarity among the third world and the developing nations, supported democratic national movements in recent years, supported China's admission to the United Nations, and opposed the fallacy of two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan. Full stop. Of course, he has also made contributions in other respects. Now, you tell me, should we or should we not unite with this kind of man? With this kind of man? No response from audience. Thank you. This was China and the 3 words of foreign policy reading to better understand Chinese and the problems with Indochina, Albania, and Yugoslavia by Hua Hua on July 30, 1977. Now, to better understand the quotations of proverbs in French, I have to show you because I belong Tang Dynasty of China. In French, they say Conte de la Dynastie des Tang. It is within Tang Dynasty where I found our roots. This is editions and language in Beijing. In French, we have Conte de la Dynastie des Tang, édition en langue étrangère, Beijing. The first edition was in 1958. The fourth tirage was in 1986. Jacket and cover Zhang Guanggu. So, la première édition était en 1958. Le quatrième tirage a eu lieu en 1986. Et la jaquette, c'est-à-dire les couvertures et tout ça, et couverture, c'est Zhang Guanggu. Les illustrations sont tirées d'éditions de la fin du XVIe et du début du XVIIe siècle des pièces de théâtre inspirées par les contes de la dynastie des Tang. Et là, nous avons la distribution a été faite par la Société chinoise du commerce international du livre, Guoji Shudian. Se trouve à Beijing, en Chine. Et tout a été imprimé en République populaire de Chine. La préface nous dit, c'est pendant la dynastie des Tang qu'on se mit à écrire en Chine des contes de forte imagination dans un langage poli et avec une grande richesse de détails qui donnait une image véridique et vivante du peuple et de la société de ce temps. Pour comprendre pourquoi la nouvelle s'est si rapidement développée pendant la dynastie des Tang, nous devons retourner en arrière. La dynastie des Tang s'était établie à la suite de la victoire de la révolution agraire à la fin de la dynastie des Sui en 581, de 581 à 618. Li Yuan, le premier empereur des Tang, et son fils Li Shimin profitèrent de la révolte agraire pour s'emparer des fruits de la victoire des paysans. L'avènement de la dynastie des Tang mit fin aux 4 siècles de démembrement, d'invasions étrangères et de chaos qui avaient suivi la chute de la dynastie des Han en l'an 220 après. Le développement des forces productives engendra une grande renaissance culturelle. La littérature, l'art, la musique, la danse et la sculpture furent plus florissants que jamais. Au fur et à mesure que le commerce prospérait, on vit surgir des grandes villes. Chang'an, alors la capitale de la dynastie des Tang, la ville de Xi'an actuelle, et d'autres villes telles que Liangzhou, Hangzhou, Canton, étaient des centres de commerce prospères. Les nouvelles exigences de la classe urbaine de commerçants s'exprimèrent donc dans les domaines de la littérature et des divertissements. Un autre facteur à faire également entrer en ligne de compte dans le développement des nouvelles des Tang est le conflit qui devait inévitablement s'élever entre la classe urbaine naissante et tout ce qui tombait en décadence dans l'ancien système féodal. Ce conflit social fournit une mine de sujets aux nouvelles. Ayant hérité la tradition de la littérature populaire, les nouvelles des Tang, on dit Tang, les nouvelles de Tang nous ont donné sous différents aspects un portrait relativement réaliste et émouvant de la vie de cette époque. C'est ainsi qu'elle occupe une place importante dans l'histoire de la littérature chinoise. Nous allons d'abord nous arriver là et nous allons ouvrir une autre vidéo et nous vous disons merci pour votre attention et restons toujours à l'écoute du Seigneur puisque nous sommes à la recherche de l'origine des religions. Il nous est dit ce qu'un catholique doit savoir par Monseigneur A. Leroy, archevêque de Cary, supérieur général de C.S.SP. Ici, nous sommes à Paris en 1922. Ceci nous permettra d'ouvrir les bibliothèques sacrées de l'histoire de la religion avec le Christ qui nous apporte la connaissance de Dieu. Sans cette connaissance-là, nul ne peut connaître l'histoire du monde parce que les églises ont joué un grand rôle dans la destruction de notre monde et la colonisation. C'est pour cela que nous avons ça, la sagesse. C'est quoi? C'est la quête d'une spiritualité sans Dieu. Ah non, on ne peut pas faire la quête de la spiritualité sans être avec Dieu. Ici, ce journal, Le Monde des religions, de novembre-décembre 2006, nous donne 10 textes fondamentaux qui aident à vivre. Voici le journal. C'est une autre histoire des religions, racontée par différents écrivains que nous allons aborder. Et nous remercions le Seigneur parce que nous devons savoir ce Jésus qu'on appelle Christ. Il y a eu une retraite au Vatican en 1970 et le livre de Jacques Lowen, publié par Fayard, nous fait le point. Je termine par là pour dire qui est Jésus-Christ. C'est l'éternelle question des hommes, appelée par le pape Paul VI, a prêché en février 1970 la retraite du Vatican. Le père Jacques Lowen ne pouvait faire mieux que de tenter une fois de plus d'y répondre. Pour reconnaître Jésus-Christ, il faut le rencontrer. Pour le rencontrer, l'écouter. Et l'écouter avec une âme de pauvre. Le père Lowen, dès les premiers entretiens de cette retraite, évoque Jésus, le Messie, tel que l'attend l'Ancien Testament. Puis apparaît Jésus tel que les évangiles nous le dépeignent. D'une humanité si humaine, fermez les guillemets, humanité si humaine. Enfin, Jésus tel que son corps mystique. L'Église se prolonge jusqu'au jour bienheureux de la résurrection. C'est donc un Jésus à 3 dimensions que nous présente le Père. Jacques Lowen. Ces 22 entretiens rédigés à l'intention de Paul VI et de ses familiers n'ont rien du style oratoire des grandes chaires. Le père Lowen parle avec la même simplicité qu'à ses donkers de Marseille. Il trouve à chaque page des exemples frappants. Il sait exprimer les vérités éternelles dans le langage des hommes d'aujourd'hui. Les chrétiens soucieux de vie spirituelle pourront donc d'emblée savourer ces pages et en tirer le meilleur profit. Quant aux prêtres, ils y trouveront une mine très riche de réflexions qu'ils utiliseront avec profit dans leurs contacts pastoraux. L'auteur, le père Jacques Lowen, est un incroyant converti. Devenu dominicain, il participe à l'expérience des prêtres ouvriers, comme donkers à Marseille. Puis, il fonde la mission ouvrière de Saint-Pierre-Saint-Paul. Mission ouvrière Saint-Pierre-Saint-Paul. Fixée d'abord à Port-de-Bouc, cette jeune communauté ne tarde pas à assaimer au Brésil, puis dans le monde entier. Aujourd'hui, le père dirige à Fribourg, en Suisse, l'école de la foi qu'il a lui-même créée. J'ai la chair de poule, je vous assure, jusqu'aux cheveux, en lisant ceci. Donc, venez, voyez, écoutez Dieu. Écoutez le pauvre, rencontrez Jésus. En vous, qui dites-vous que je suis? C'est la question qu'a posée Jésus. page 58. Et je termine par là. C'était le lundi 16 février 1970. Et vous, qui dites-vous que je suis? C'est Jésus qui nous demande ça. Et c'est écrit, arrivé dans la région de Césarée de Philippe, Jésus posa à ses disciples cette question. Dans Saint Luc, chacun des évangélistes nous parle de cet épisode. Il est dit que Jésus était en prière. Luc chapitre 9, verset 18. Donc, Jésus pose cette question. Je cite. Au dire des gens, qu'est le Fils de l'homme? Ils dirent, je cite, pour les uns, il est Jean-Baptiste, pour d'autres, Élie, pour d'autres encore, Jérémie ou quelqu'un des prophètes. Fermez les guillemets, ouvrez d'autres guillemets. Mais pour vous, leur dit-il, qui suis-je? Fermez les guillemets, virgule, tiret. Pour vous, pour toi, pour chacun. Ouvrez les guillemets. Prenant alors la parole, Simon-Pierre répondit, je cite, tu es le Christ, le Fils du Dieu vivant. Fermez les guillemets. En réponse, Jésus lui déclara, ouvrez les guillemets, tu es heureux, Simon, fils de Jonas, car cette révélation t'est venue non de la chair et du sang, mais de mon Père qui est dans les cieux. Vous lirez cela dans Matthieu 16, verset 17. Merci Seigneur pour tes enseignements. En ce jour 22 mai 2024, c'est vraiment un enseignement encore plus riche que tous les jours. À bientôt.